chapter 3, let's go. The furnace. This is the famous one that we all get in Sunday school, and so they do a wonderful thing with it in Veggie Tales. Bizarre thing in Veggie Tales. Kind of bizarre. Okay, let's look at Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of God. You know, last week we had Daniel interpreting a dream to King Nebuchadnezzar and saying, you know, this is what's going to happen in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And Nebuchadnezzar ends up by saying, you know, Daniel, your God is a wonderful God. He's surely your God is the God of God and Lord of lords, Lord of kings, and revealer of mysteries, and so he's a wonderful guy. King Nebuchadnezzar, however, sometime after this, in verse 1, of chapter 3, made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, remember what I said about lists last week? He likes lists. Prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So, all those guys assembled for the dedication of the image King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you're commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of all those instruments, summarizing the list, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, I don't know how long it was after, this incident with the dream where the king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is King of kings and Lord of lords." It might have been a couple of years, it might have been a couple of days, because God knows that sometimes the people in power in government have the attention span of a flea. Okay? And they turn from one thing to the next, and you just don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. Not speaking of any government in particular, but, God knows that this is the way things are normally, okay? So, anyway. So, any comments so far on this episode?
I'd like to see a 90-foot gold statue.
I'd like to see a 90-foot gold statue.
Yeah.
There'd be a big toe missing.
Get that right.
Just like a little toe.
All right. Somebody read on from verse 8, please. All right, well, there it is. You said you'd like to see it. There it is. Kind of off in the distance. It looks like it's ready to do the hokey pokey. All right, anyway. Somebody read verse 8.
At this time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, and all that stuff must fall down and worship the image of gold, and whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there were some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods, nor worship the image of gold you have set up."
Okay, good. Now, somebody else please read starting verse 13, 14, and 15.
Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?"
Okay, thanks very much. Questions or thoughts so far on this story so far? Now, these are the guys who just in the previous chapter, Nebuchadnezzar has said,
Yeah.
you know, your God is God of gods and King of, Lord of kings, but now I've made this image and I want you to bow down to it, and they're not gonna do it. So I'll throw you in a fiery furnace, which is there in the background of the picture behind me. So again, I don't know how long afterwards this happened.
Well, he is like fulfilling the dream. He's making a head of himself gold,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah,
I won't say that much, you know.
Yeah, and that's a good point, that the head of the statue in the previous one in the dream was gold, but, he should have known from that one that, it's not gonna last forever, because it's only the head, so.
Well, like a 2-year-old, he heard exactly what he wanted to.
Mm-hmm,
And then I do what I want.
mm-hmm.
No, I ain't gonna say it, I'll be nice.
Oh, come on, spare it.
That's all right, we're all thinking it, well, some of us. All right, 16 through 18.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up.
Okay, thanks very much. This is an important verse that often gets overlooked when we teach it in Sunday school. But it's an important verse, and James Dobson was the one that kind of pointed out the importance of it a number of years ago, at least to my recollection. And the point is this: what they tell Nebuchadnezzar is this: God is able to save us. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to obey you. It's just that simple. We believe that God is able to save us. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to obey you. And it's not like, even if he can't, but it's like, we're going to leave it up to him. If he chooses to save us, good. If he chooses not to save us, that's up to him. But regardless of what he chooses to do, we're not going to serve you. And their point in the first line is, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. So it's not, we don't need to defend ourselves, it's we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Who do they need to defend themselves before? God. Yeah. So, So God, here's the deal. We either worship you or we worship Nebuchadnezzar's gods. And if we're going to worship you, then, regardless of what Nebuchadnezzar does, we're still going to be faithful to you. That means Nebuchadnezzar, do with us what you want. We're not going to do it. Now, as it turns out, in this case, something miraculous happens, right? You know the story, I think. I hope. Well, let's read on, beginning at verse 19. Somebody read.
Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Why?
I thought there was sound effects with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace.
Okay, you can stop there. Comments on that?
Kind of ironic, the three that were throwing, or the ones who were throwing them in kind of burned up.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm having this vision of a fire, I mean, it's not like a campfire. That had
No.
to be like what's like
Blast
an
furnace.
oven, an oven?
Blast furnace.
Yeah.
Like a blast furnace, you know, for steel casting.
And two guys in the back with large saw.
Yeah.
Get that air in there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Come to go again.
We used to have a congregation over in the Pittsburgh area. Trying to think which one it was. That, we had several of them in some of those steel towns that surrounded Pittsburgh. And there was one of them that was built years ago right across the street from a blast furnace. So you'd open the door of the church, like our church does, you'd open the door and look across the street, and there was a blast furnace right there, so you could see it. Flames from the door of the church.
They're big, they're hot. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
there they are.
yeah, yeah, they are. The other, you know, just a little tiny note here on verse 21. Cultural note, you can tell these men were living in Babylon because they're wearing robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes. The Babylonians wore trousers and turbans. The Jews would not have worn those. I mean, you know, and by Jesus' day, they would have worn tunics and, you know, robes. But, you know, in Jesus' day, they didn't wear trousers, you know, or turbans. You know, turbans would have been typically Babylonian. But not pants with legs, you know, and the long robes down to their feet, like you see in the pictures. This is the kind of chapter that Hebrew teachers like, you know. I think my professor at the seminary who did rapid reading of the Hebrew Bible liked this because of all the lists and things. These odd words, like Hebrew words like robes and trousers and things like that only show up here. Okay, so anyway, they threw the guys into the firing furnace, and so verse 24, and somebody just read from 24 through 27, please.
Then Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. And he said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and all them people. They saw the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them.
Okay, thank you. So, there you go. So pretty miraculous thing, not a trace or a bit of evidence that he'd even been in this fiery furnace. No scorched hair, no singed beards. Nothing, not even the smell of fire on them.
Now I got a question.
Okay,
I've heard of so-called Bible scholars talk about this 4th
yes.
being in there. Some proclaim that it is the Son of God.
Mhm.
Some, if you read the King James Version, it's an angel.
Mhm.
So, what's your take on that? Or is it just, there is no take?
Well, I don't know, it's kinda like, what do you think?
Well, I think it's an angel.
Yeah, okay.
Because God always did send angels.
Yeah.
Yeah, angels do show up in Daniel periodically. This is the first of those instances. He says, the fourth looks like a son of the gods. Is that Jesus? Is that an angel? Yeah. Why not? Could be either.
Okay,
You know,
all right.
and without any more information, it could be either one. Why not?
So would it be Jesus before Jesus was born?
Jesus before Jesus was born. Why not?
No, I mean, that's.
The Son of God before he was Jesus, maybe.
Yeah.
Sure, why not? I mean, that's
Because I
part of
don't
the
think they
theory.
would say it that way if it wasn't him.
He was like, well,
The son
except
of the
Nebuchadnezzar
gods.
is a Babylonian, but he's the son of the gods, you know, he doesn't exactly know what that means. Is that an angel? Is that Jesus? You know, I don't think this is a Trinitarian confession, in other words, you know, like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. What we always say is Jesus as the Son, as Jesus, the human being, he was born at a certain point in time, which came later than the Daniel stories. But as the Son of God, he existed from the beginning of the world, so why could he not show up in the fiery furnace to protect these guys? Or on the other hand, it could be an angel.
The next verse says it's, yeah. Or at least Nebuchadnezzar says it's.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, what verse?
Who is that?
28,
Mhm.
Oh, well, okay, it says an angel.
yep.
That's Nebuchadnezzar's.
But that's
thing.
Nebuchadnezzar,
Right.
and
What does he know?
he's a politician, not a theologian.
Yeah.
And as we well know from listening to the words of many politicians over the years, they know as much about theology as, you know, Orville Redenbacher knows about hot dogs.
You know, he could have been a connoisseur about hot dogs, I'm just saying. That wasn't nice saying that.
Probably goes right.
We're gonna stop you out on the way home.
Pass the fly swatter.
Yeah.
Can you pass the fly swatter down?
That's his brother, wasn't it? Oscar Mayer?
Like I was dead.
Maybe neighbors.
That's his brother.
Scalpel.
Those ought to be great.
Try not to hit the
How'd
Bible.
you get that
Oh,
coffee?
get the coffee.
That's
Feet away
exactly
from
what I do.
Jeez. And you were a
Is
fireman?
that the same fly?
No.
Oh, this
No,
is
that's
the
his
new
brother.
Give me
The one that was here is on his way up to North Court Street in Medina, right
Oh,
now,
Ah.
buried in a tiny little box.
Oh, that one.
I'm calling Hal on the way and saying, Hal, I'm sending you one.
Show 'em how it's
Must be
done.
pretty busy
In a
with
matchbox.
those.
Yeah.
In a matchbox.
She catches them.
Oh,
Oh, I'm sure she does.
She does.
We were
but-
out to eat, there was an
I
ant crawling across the table that she rescued, an ant.
well, he was carrying something and and then I made him drop it, so.
Ah.
I feel bad.
Ants are different though, you know, because flies are servants of Satan.
Now, the ones at home on my counter, they got the liquid.
Yeah.
And they haven't been back.
I have the.
You know, that's why demons, you know, this name of the demon is Beelzebub, over the flies. So flies are servants
Yeah,
of Satan,
I
you
got
know,
it.
Cinnamon.
Liquid trash.
smashed.
I did
Anyway,
it once in the 80s.
all right, so let's go on with,
Kills him.
let's go on with Nebuchadnezzar's somewhat strange testimony here. Okay, so verse 28, somebody read, please. Here he is, by the way, that's a true and honest picture of Nebuchadnezzar on the screen. Yeah, without his trousers.
Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who speak anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
Okay, very good, thanks very much. There's something that I want to point out here on this proclamation of the king, not only that, was that an angel in the fiery furnace? Yeah. We'll go with angel, because angels show up a couple other times in Daniel, and that's the standard word for them, eventually throughout Daniel. But what the king does is he promotes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Babylon. He also promotes God. Okay, so he doesn't say exactly, we're not going to worship any other gods, right? But what he does say is, from now on, if anybody says anything against their God, we're going to demolish their house and, execute those people. Okay, so if you imagine that the Babylonians have like a whole shelf full of gods, the God of Israel gets to be put up on the shelf along with everybody else now. Okay, so after this incident, it's like, they took the items from the temple in Jerusalem and put them into the temple in Babylon, so that the God of Israel was a prisoner right? We talked about that at the beginning. So the God of Israel was like a prisoner to the gods of Babylon. Now he's no longer a prisoner, but he's on the shelf with the rest of them. But that doesn't mean that Nebuchadnezzar says he's the one and only God that we should worship. What he's saying basically is, he's got equal place among all the other gods. Okay, so lest we get too excited and say, oh, suddenly Nebuchadnezzar has become a Christian in all of this. He hasn't. Okay, this is a political promotion is basically what it is. Okay, which is okay.
Start.
It's a start, because it promotes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the religion of the Jews and the Jewish people. It doesn't necessarily free the Jews either, but it just says, we're not going to, there's going to be a certain amount of religious toleration now. So it's a bit of a start. Okay. All right, comments or questions on this whole thing about the fiery furnace? Okay, on the sheets that you have, on the handouts that you have, we did this 5 years ago, as it says, in 2013. Daniel 3, a catalog of engagement for believers in a hostile culture. And instead of opening it up, if you turn all the way to the back, here's all kinds of choices. So if we're believers in a hostile culture, and in some ways our culture is very hostile to Christians, depending on what Christians do. So here we are sitting in this building on a Sunday morning, and chances are, the military police aren't going to come in and invade this building and put a stop to what we're doing. But there's also ways, and you've heard of these things, in which Christians, are going to face a certain amount of hostility in our culture. So, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the hostility we face in our culture? Do we do it, knowing that, guys like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in that culture that was hostile to them, said, if you don't do this, we're going to burn you up in the fiery furnace. And they said, do with us what you want. We're not going to do what you ask us to do or command us to do. So here are some possible choices. And, I'm not going to say, which ones look good to you? Which ones look good to you at any given time? Which ones look good to you at any given circumstance? Possible choices for Christians. You can't beat them, so you might as well join them.
You're talking about the hostile culture.
Yeah, the hostile culture. You can't beat it, so you might as well join it. Be friends with them, just don't become like them. That's kind of hard to do. Number 3, keep your head down and fly under the radar. Number 4, don't make waves, but you are allowed to grumble. Number 5, grumble all you want, but remember the NSA is probably listening. Number 6, write a letter to the editor once in a while. You can try that, but you know, you try that and probably your spouse is gonna say, why did you do that? Without running it past me first.
John never
Sounds
even
like
tells me
experience.
when he.
John never tells you when he's gonna do that. What was that, Dan?
Sounds like experience.
Oh, sounds like experience. Speak at a village council meeting.
Don't work good.
Run for any kind of office. Yeah, that's what we do. I'll change things from the inside out by running for office. More Christians in politics. Support some kind of activist organization. Attend a rally.
Yeah, I like 11 and 12,
Get arrested.
yeah,
Okay, and then get arrested a few more times.
yeah.
Is this
You
from
like those?
experience? From
Greenpeace.
experience?
Might be able to do some work there, though.
Dan's always happy when you do that.
And then you can write a book about your experiences and become a darling of the talk show circuit.
You want yours for your
Get yourself, no, more like the talk or something. Get yourself on the Homeland Security no-fly list. Buy a large compound in Montana, lots of, you know, all that other kind of
I
stuff.
like that one. I like that. Yeah, that's really good.
Well, that's
Do we have
like,
to go to Montana, though?
that's not engaging the hostile
You can do
culture
that,
at all.
why?
That's kind of like running away from the hostile
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah, they got good food.
Canned.
Yes, there's canned bottled water.
And that's,
Makes
you know,
videos.
MREs, sea rats and MREs.
Do you ever feel like a kindergarten teacher? Because it's like, squirrel!
I've never been a kindergarten teacher, so I don't know the answer. But I have aides, you know.
It's only one. I have 25 of them.
Oh, man.
And then how do you make your choices? Again, this is 5 years old, so how do you make your choices? Popular opinion? You listen to Rush, you know, I don't know who listens to Rush anymore, but
Come on now.
there's other, depends on what you eat, conscience,
Code of the Jedi.
Code of the Jedi,
I like that one, don't you? I like that one.
Golden Rule, Magic 8 Ball, you know, other codes. How do you make those kind of choices and what do you do? And what examples do you follow? I mean, there's, on the inside, there's a whole lot of examples there, possible examples. Some of whom you possibly have heard of. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, for instance, was a German, up in the upper left-hand corner, was a German Lutheran pastor, actually he was a German Lutheran pastor in Germany, came to the United States just before World War II, and then went back to Germany to teach in an underground Lutheran seminary there because he felt it was necessary to do that. And then he was arrested in April 1943 because he was part of a plot to kill Hitler. And then they executed him in a prison camp, in the concentration camp, shortly before it was liberated. But he's, you know, evangelicals of all sorts read his letters and his books and all that other stuff. Billy Graham, on the other hand, you know, was well, you know Billy Graham. And he sat in White House Oval Office many times to tell presidents various things. Who knows what they talked about, but Billy Graham managed somehow to be able somehow to speak something that looked like the gospel to all kinds of presidents and all kinds of people in power, without ruffling a whole lot of feathers. And yet they, you know, he had a lot of respect for all of those people. Mother Teresa, same deal. You know, Mother Teresa was able to sit at the desks of people in power and look them in the eyeballs and tell them, God wants you to do this, and they would do it. You know, whether they were Catholics or not. And, you know, talking about people that got arrested numbers of times for doing what they believed they should do. You know, you got Philip and Daniel Berrigan, remember those guys?
Yeah.
From all the protests they were involved in during the Vietnam War. They were on the FBI 10 most wanted list for quite a while. The Berrigan brothers. Nelson Mandela was in prison. Martin Luther King did all kinds of stuff that he believed was the right thing to do because he believed that's what the gospel told him to do, and he lost his life for it. So did those people in Gnadenhutten down there at the bottom left-hand corner. Okay. Those are missionaries who came to Ohio to bring the gospel to American Indians living down there. And they converted a whole bunch of Christian Indians into Christianity at the settlement of Gnadenhutten and Schönbrunn. And
That's a really neat place.
it's a really neat place, but it's also sad. I mean, if you go
yeah.
down there, it's sad what happened to them. They were massacred by settlers who thought they were fighting on behalf of the British. They rounded up 100 of them and locked them in the building and set it on fire and killed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to have our family picnics down there. The other evening.
Another list over there is the martyrs of Vietnam. The Vatican estimates the number of Vietnamese martyrs, actual Christian people in Vietnam who lost their lives during the Vietnam era because they were Christians. Somewhere between 130 and 300,000 people who they just don't really know. So they have one single feast day for all of those, to remember all of those folks who were Christians who lost their lives. So how do you do this? You know, what do you do? Matt Harrison, who's the president of the Missouri Synod, partly it's his job as the president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod to stand up in front of government committees and testify in opposition to some things that the government wants to do, to say this is what the church believes. This is our position, this is what we do. So, you know, how do you make those choices? And what you do. And whose example do you follow? And sometimes it means, what do we do when we're faced with a fiery furnace situation? Well, the government says, do this or we'll throw you in the fiery furnace. And Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego said, go ahead, we're just not doing it.
The courage it took to do that.
Mm-hmm. The courage and the faith it took. Because ultimately, somewhere along the line, you have to say to whoever it is in power, like they did to Nebuchadnezzar, it's not you that we have to defend our actions to.
What I like best about that is when he said, even if he doesn't say this, he's still our God.
Yeah,
That's the part I like the best.
yeah.
Because because it reminds me, like when you pray, you may not always get the answer you want, but it's God's answer and it's in God's time, not yours. And sometimes we forget that.
I think the difficulty I think that we have is that we think that maybe we've had it so good for so long, I don't know, but I think as Christians, we think that our government is way more favorable to Christians than we think it is, and I think in many respects, it's a lot more like the days of Nebuchadnezzar than we realize. You you just never know from one day to the next how the government is going to act and respond and whatnot to Christians and what we want to do. And you just never know who's going to get caught up in it and for what reason. Right, Bob?
Yes, what?
So I'm messed with this.
Well,
Whatever you
it's
say.
pretty evident when you take the prayer out of school and the Ten Commandments out of courthouses, and the list goes on and on. The
Yeah.
things that have happened to religious, things, things in this country. It shows you the government, and the government is being run by people who are anti-Christian. Because Christians are not gonna take the Ten Commandments out of the courthouse, and they're not gonna do the other things that all these people have done over the past 20 years. It's just, and they never quit. They don't give up, they just keep going and going, no matter what we try to stop them, they don't give up.
They're right and everyone else is wrong.
Mhm.
And, the municipalities, they're scared to spend $10 to fight the thing. Maybe if they went around to the churches and collected money, they'd be able to hire lawyers, but they don't even try, they just give up. All right, take it out. Take a picture of Jesus off the wall at the library, it doesn't matter. Been there 100 years, hasn't hurt a person, but they take it down. I don't get it.
Well, it's also amazing too that we have, I'm going back to the 1970s. Remember Madeline Murray O'Hare? She just had, how did she get all this power to say, change everything over? And she did.
Well, to a certain extent, it's fear because,
Yeah.
all you did was mention her name just now. And
No,
we all are like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Boy.
But every once in a while,
Don't forget a really good
something comes out, an email or something will come out. The son of Madeline Murray O'Hare, and all of a sudden Christians are like, oh no, even these days anymore. So to a certain extent, there's like a fear. We're afraid we're going to be in these days again. We're going to have to bow down to this idol or that idol or get thrown in the fiery furnace. And it's almost a knee-jerk reaction when probably what we should be doing is saying, you know what, regardless, like these guys, no matter what you try to do, we don't answer to you ultimately. We answer to the God who gave us his son, Jesus Christ. So, do what you want to do. Act like babies, act like tyrants, act like reasonable people. It doesn't matter. We worship the God who gave us his son Jesus, and that's the one that's going to take us to heaven or send us to hell. That's the answer. And he'll do what he wants to us in this life. We know what he's going to do to us in the next life. So, there you go. But yes, it does take a certain amount of either chutzpah or intestinal fortitude to do that. And probably these guys had both. Okay? All right, next week, chapter 4, and one more chapter with Nebuchadnezzar. This one is about madness. After this, after some time, Nebuchadnezzar goes completely insane. And so we'll talk about insanity or madness or whatever. But for today, this is enough, okay? Let us